Hello everyone and welcome to my book talk about Death's Acres inside the legendary forensic lab of the body farm where the dead do tell tales. By Dr. Bill Bass and John Jefferson, presented by Helen. The hook I chose was, I didn't get rich that day, but I sure got hooked. It was fascinating to see the way burned and broken bones could identify a victim, solve a long-standing mystery, close a case. So, what is Death Acres? Death Acres is an autobiography about the life of Dr. Bill Bass. Dr. Bill Bass was an anthropologist who, throughout his lifetime, was able to solve many different cases that were presented to him. One of the most famous cases that he was able to look at was the case of the Charles Lindbergh Jr., also commonly known as the Iglet baby, where Charles Lindbergh's child had gone missing one night, and then a while later, the bones were turned up and eventually identified as the child. I'm pretty sure. Another one is the unsavory uncle. This was about a young child who went missing, and detectives later suspected the uncle was involved in the murder of the case. Another case was the case of the headless corpse. This was outside of a family's house, in the back of it where they had a little cemetery. One day the wife went outside and noticed that one of the graves in the cemetery had been overturned and disturbed. So they called in Dr. Bass to take a look at it and see what they could find. And they ended up finding a corpse, but they couldn't find the head. Later, they figured out that the head was placed in the coffin that was already buried in the grave. And the body and the corpse and everything actually turned out to be a Civil War veteran known as Colonial Shea. Another case that Dr. Bill Bass was able to solve was one where a man's house had burned down and they couldn't figure out why exactly. And so after some careful examination, they ended up figuring out that it was a homicide instead of a suicide. Some other things that the book mentions was grounded in science, where one of his anthropologist students, Arcade, proposed entering our PhD program in developing a quantitative scientific technique that would rely on biochemical data to determine time since death. So basically what he wanted to do was he wanted to take samples of the soil from underneath where a body was found and then go about 10 to 15 yards away and also get sample of the soil, and he would compare those and try to determine how long the body had been dead. Another famous case that Dr. Bill was able to be involved in was the Zoo Man murders. This was where this was a serial killer who had multiple victims that would either show up in a wood area or a barn. The outcome was to be decided. Another thing was parts unknown. So parts unknown is a little bit different because this was a case about a family whose wife had gone missing. The daughter reported that the mother went missing, and the father was just like, oh yeah, she kind of just, left for whatever reason. It's kind of unknown, we don't know. But it later turned out that the father, or the husband, had a lot more to play in the role of what happened to the wife than we thought. Another section of the book would be a bug for research. This was when another one of his anthropology students were also trying to figure out how long the body had been dead, how long decomposure happens, and like the different time frames for that. And so his research was focused on bugs and mostly like how maggots and bullflies would eat away at the flesh of bodies once they were turned up, and like how long that would last, to figure out how long a body had been dead, but then also how long it takes for a body to decompose. So what is the Body Farm? The Body Farm is a forensic anthropology facility, the first of its kind to be made. Dr.Bill had gotten this idea from a detective who, I think it was Detective Harold Nye, who was actually working the Clutter case at the time. He had mentioned something and it resonated with Dr. Bass for many years. And later, he got the idea to start a body farm because they needed someplace that they could put bodies that they needed to look at but couldn't do right away, whether it be because they had to take the flesh off or because they were still missing parts of it or whatever. And so they started the body farm so they could house those bodies and take time to run experiments on it, which is where some of his anthropology students who were running cases about the soil and about the bugs would also do their work. So, yes. This was also where he helped to solve many cases and had his students discover different ways to tell how long bodies have been dead or how to identify a body. Personal connection. To me, this book was really fascinating, and it actually mentioned the Clutter case, which we read the book In Cold Blood by Truman Capote in class. So I thought that was really cool that I could have already had knowledge of that case and then to be able to reference it in a different book. I thought that was really cool. But this book, like if you've ever watched a documentary on the History Channel of like one time they had a Jack the Ripper case where it was a documentary all about the Jack the Ripper, but it had a bunch of smaller cases within it. So this to me really reminded me of that, of like what a history documentary would be about, except it was focused on Dr. Bill's life instead. Academic response, level of difficulty. I definitely think there's words in here that are high school, college level, but I don't think it could be too hard for a high schooler to understand. But I also don't necessarily think that this book would be rated for a middle schooler necessarily, especially with all the graphic details and everything that it goes into about the cases. But overall, I thought the difficulty level of the reading was not too simplistic, that it got boring, but not too difficult that I had to like stop and constantly go look up what something meant or whatever. So I thought it was very easy to like interpret what they meant. Why was this interesting? I found this book interesting because of the different cases it mentioned. Like I mentioned earlier, it brought up the Clutter case, which I had already had a little bit of prior knowledge to. So that was also really interesting to learn about. But then also, I just love the fact that it sheds light on not only anthropology itself, because most people don't know what that is, because that's not always a topic discussed, but also the fact that it brings up so many different cases and brings up other people's difficulties and actually brings justice to many cases that either were left unsolved or have not been mentioned enough. Would you recommend? I would say that I would recommend this book. If you like thrillers and mysteries, I think this would be really interesting to you. I definitely like it, and I'm more of a romance type of reader more than a true crime or mystery person myself, but I thought it was really educational but also exciting to read and like follow along with it to see like what happened along the way. Recommendations. Who would like this? Well, I think if you're into history, mysteries, action, and justice, this is the book for you. It definitely is more historical because of all the different cases and stuff, but also does have a sense of mystery and action because you don't always necessarily know what's going to happen in the cases, but it keeps you entertained enough that you find out what happens. And it does shed justice on the light of many cases that happened. My overall thoughts were I love this book, and I'm not going to lie, I was a little scared about reading it at first because I thought I wouldn't like it. But once I started reading it, I just could not put the book down, and all I would do was read the book. I actually have 2 other people asking to borrow the book already. So I think my overall thoughts of the book was that it was very enlightening and very interesting to like learn about not only Dr. Bass's life, but how anthropology works and how some of some of the scientific methods used in identifying bodies, whether it be who they are or how long ago they died. I thought that was really interesting that the book was able to talk about.